Hi folks, my name is Tyler Dryblatt. I'm the Interpretive Programs Manager here at Fort Miles, and today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the plotting table and Battery 519's plotting room. The analogy I like to use here is a quarterback throwing a football to a receiver. We can imagine all of Fort Miles as a quarterback throwing a football, in this case a big artillery shell, to a receiver, in this case a German battleship. If we think of Fort Miles as a quarterback, once the quarterback takes that snap, the first thing they have to do is use their eyes. They have to kind of look downfield. We could say that the towers that were part of Fort Miles are kind of the eyes of the fort. We had 11 towers in Delaware and 4 over in Cape May, New Jersey, for a total of 15 fire control towers. In those towers, we had teams of soldiers constantly scanning the horizon for enemy ships. And if they spotted one, they'd begin to track it using an instrument called an azimuth. An azimuth is basically a big telescope that lets you tell how far to the left or how far to the right a ship is. So they'd start tracking a ship with an azimuth. At regular intervals, they'd mark down the reading on their azimuth, they'd get on a telephone in the tower, and they'd call down to the plotting room. If the towers are like the eyes of the fort, I like to think of the plotting room as the brain. This is where all the information comes in, where all the plans and decisions are being made. So inside this brain, we have a team of soldiers standing around the plotting table. They're getting calls from those towers. Maybe Tower 3 calls in, and they say, "This is Tower 3, and our azimuth says the enemy battleship is at 250 degrees. So a soldier would take the arm attached to Tower 3 and move it over until it lined up with 250 degrees on this outside ring. At the same time, maybe Tower 11's calling in. They say, "We see that exact same battleship, but our azimuth says that it's at 320 degrees. So we move that arm until it lines up with 320 degrees on the outside ring." Now we can begin to get a better sense of where that ship is. We know the distance between our two towers. We have their angular measurements. Where those angles meet, that's where our battleship has to be. It's just applied trigonometry. When your teacher told you it was good for something, this is what they were talking about: sinking German battleships. So now we've plotted one point, but we still have a couple things we need to know. We need to know how fast the ship is moving and in what direction it's headed. To figure that out, we just keep plotting more points. The towers keep calling in, we move these arms, we plot a second point, a third point, a fourth point. Now we can begin to see in what direction the ship is moving and how fast it's getting there. We also need to know what's going on in the environment. Things like air temperature, precipitation, humidity, wind speed and direction, even the tides and the rotation of the Earth all factored into your shot. So there was actually a 10-man weather team here at Fort Miles that would be calling in the weather conditions. Those would be written as a numerical code on a meteorological board, so the men working the table could look over, see what the weather conditions were, and enter that into their calculations. We've got speed, we've got direction, we've got weather, but we're still missing one thing. So far, we've been aiming at where the ship is. We need to aim at where the ship is going to be. To do that, we use a little device called a set forward scale. A set forward scale was basically a little piece of paper onto which soldiers would mark out various distances ahead of time, represented by the hash marks on this piece of paper here. Based on the speed of your ship, that would tell you which set forward scale you'd want to use. You would take your scale and you would line up those hash marks with the points you had already plotted, and that would give you an idea of where that ship was going to be. Now that we know where our ship is going to be, we can take our gun arm and we move it over to that location. The number on this outside ring, that now becomes how far to the left or right our gun needs to aim. And the number on this inside arm, that becomes how elevated or depressed the gun needs to be. Once we have all of that information, we can say we've come up with a firing solution. We get back on the phones and we call down to the gun bunker and let the guys actually manning the gun know how they have to aim. Now that's a lot of work. To make things even more difficult, these men were under a time limit. There was a bell in this room, and every 30 seconds, that bell would ring and you had to have your firing solution ready to go. So put yourself in their shoes for a minute. Think about the hardest math test that you've ever had to take. Not only do you have to get every question right on this test, but you need to get every question right within 30 seconds, or you fail the test. That's the equivalent of what these guys were doing here. So with all of that in mind, the calculations they had to do, the time limit they were working under, how accurate do you think they were? If we took all of the Coast Artillery guns in the United States Army and we averaged them together, they would come out to be about 80% accurate, which is pretty good. The men of Fort Miles, though, were much better than that. The men of Fort Miles managed 98.2% accuracy, which is incredible. In fact, it was so good that the US Army chose the men working here to be recorded for some of the Coast Artillery training videos to train all the other batteries. I do want to remind everybody that Fort Miles was never actually attacked, so we get this 98.2% from the practice and training that was going on here. They were practicing very regularly to make sure they were ready for any possible attack. I don't think that reduces the impressiveness of their accomplishment at all. I just want you all to know that we weren't actually trying to sink the Bismarck or anything like that. I hope you have a better understanding of how plotting and the plotting rooms here at Fort Miles worked, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.